those spots, but highs of 16, 17 Celsius across the south and southeast are feeling pleasant for the time of year. Once again, as the overnight period, there'll be a mix of cloud and clear spells, perhaps some pockets of fog, not quite as much as Wednesday morning though, and we'll start to see some outbreaks of rain and those blustery winds move in from the west. Fairly unsettled as we head towards the weekend with average temperatures. Bye for now.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Rann, and long delays continue up in South Yorkshire on the M1 northbound. One lane remains closed from junction 31 to 32, heading away from Sheffield up to the M18 interchange. A lorry's broken down in the inside lane. The slip road has also been closed. On the M56 in Cheshire, the inside lane's blocked off eastbound from junction 14, the Chester services through to the Runcorn turn-off. Junction 12 at the scene of an accident, causing long queues back to the M53, heading away from Chester. On the M6 in Staffordshire, the inside lane of 4 closed southbound from junction 15 to 14 towards Stafford following a collision. And on the Surrey stretch of the M25, the 2 outside lanes are blocked off clockwise following a multi-vehicle crash just after the M3. Long queues nearly back to the A3. On the M2 in Kent, the westbound exit shut at junction 2 at Strood for emergency bridge repairs. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Make sure you don't miss out. Get your entry in now. Just one entry could make you the winner. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close 5 p.m. this Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co. Now, yesterday, a police marksman was found not guilty of murdering Chris Cabba. But what we couldn't tell you then, though, is just how much of an absolute wrong-un Chris Cabba actually was. So I'm asking you, was it right then that a court order prevented that information from being shared? And do you think it's right, given this information, that the marksman was publicly named? Especially now that apparently that fella has got a bounty on his head. Also, today, big up Keir Starmer, yes man. That was the message from outside of prisons today, apparently, as the next tranche of criminals got released early. Amongst their jubilation, get this everyone, a convict managed to jump over a prison wall and escape. I literally kid you not. Let's discuss this. Also, there's calls for a wealth tax to be applied to the rich. You tell me if there should be one, and if so, who would it apply to and what would the rate be? That and lots more on keeping me company tonight to get stuck in my panel, the former Conservative Minister Steve Baker and the Senior Lecturer at Queen Mary University of London, Dr. Richard Johnson. But first, let's grab tonight's 6 o'clock news.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler with your headlines just after 6 o'clock. It can now be reported Chris Cabba, who was shot dead by police in September 2022, was a major figure in one of London's most notorious gangs and was accused of being involved in 2 shootings just days before he died. Court reporting restrictions have been lifted, revealing his ties to a nightclub shooting and a second incident with gunshot residue and a balaclava found on him when he died. Police officer Martin Blake was cleared of the 24-year-old's murder yesterday after a jury acquitted him in just over 3 hours. Cabba's family say they're devastated over the verdict, vowing to continue their fight for justice. The Independent Office for Police Conduct is now considering whether Blake will face disciplinary action. More than 1,000 prisoners are being released today as part of the government's efforts to free up space in jails. 1,700 inmates were freed last month after warnings that as few as 80 prison places were available. Currently, there are just over 2,000 free spaces, but that number is expected to reach critical capacity again by next summer. Now, police have found a body in the search for missing mother Victoria Taylor. The 34-year-old nurse left her home in Malton, North Yorkshire, on the 30th of September. Speaking in a press briefing in York a short while ago, Assistant Chief Constable Wayne Fox said the body was found by the police underwater search team in the River Derwent, close to where Miss Taylor's belongings were recovered. In other news, at least 18 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike near Lebanon's biggest public hospital in Beirut. Israel insists the hospital wasn't the target and wasn't damaged, but pictures appear to show rescuers searching through piles of broken concrete and twisted metal looking for survivors. Meanwhile, Hezbollah claims it launched missiles at a suburb near Tel Aviv in response. It comes as America's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, is in Israel to push for a ceasefire in Gaza. To the US now, where the former CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch has been arrested on sex trafficking and prostitution charges. Mike Jeffries, along with his partner Matthew Smith and alleged middleman James Jacobson, were taken into custody this morning. The arrests follow an FBI investigation sparked by claims that the couple coerced young men into having sex at parties thrown for the American fashion brand. The FBI and prosecutors have been giving an update, alleging that victims were made to believe that by attending sex events, they would further their careers. They also allege victims who attended the events were pressured into drinking alcohol and were also injected with substances. Lawyers for Jeffries and Smith have both previously denied any wrongdoing. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Michelle.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Oh, is it back to me? I was lost for a brief nanosecond in those pictures of the semi-naked men. Forgive me. Just kidding. I'm way more professional than that, I think. Anyway, look, hello, good evening. Michelle Dewberry, Dewbs and Kirtle, 7 o'clock tonight alongside me. My panel. I've never had these two on together. What a treat for everybody. The former Conservative Minister Steve Baker and the Senior Lecturer at Queen Mary University of London, Dr Richard Johnson. Good evening. I missed you last time you were on, so it's nice to have you. It's also very nice indeed to have each and every single one of you at home as well. There is a lot we need to discuss tonight. I want to talk to you about wealth tax. Do you think we need one? And if so, tell me to whom and how much. Also, Chris Cabba. Goodness gracious me. It's all come out now, hasn't it, ladies and gents? There's lots I want to talk to you about when it comes to that. Get in touch with me all the usual ways. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go to the website, which is gbnews.com/yoursay. Talk to me and each other there. Or you can tweet or X me. But look, the big news today. people, I mean, where do we even begin with this? Have you seen some of these prisoners that are being released today? Big up Keir Starmer, they were saying, celebrating with their loved ones, getting lifts in very stunning, luxurious cars. I have to say, who am I talking about? The 1,000 prisoners that were being released early today. Why? Because of overcrowding in the prisons. This, of course, is the second wave of this. We've seen one already before. There was quite a few mistakes with that one. This one, I can tell you now, one of our GB News reporters witnessed a man, shall we say, escaping from the prison right in front of her eyes. That prison now is trying to frantically do a roll call and find out who on earth that was. I'm talking about Kirkham Prison, by the way. They're urgently working with the police to recapture this prisoner. I'm laughing, but I don't know why, because it's a really, really serious issue. It's your fault, Labour say, Steve, the Tories.
Yeah. Well, we should have got round to building those 14,000 prison places which we set out to build. I mean, the planning system is notorious for slowing things down. And, you know, one of my colleagues in Buckinghamshire wouldn't mind me saying he campaigned hard against a new prison in Buckinghamshire, and we should have driven them through. I mean, this is not acceptable. I think fault is too much. Labour soon found the prison places when they needed to, when it suited them. But
you on about Greg Smith, by the way?
Greg, of course. Yeah. And Greg's a great man, and his voters want him to oppose a new prison. But this is why it takes too long to build prisons. But we need those places. They
know, but you were in power for well over a decade.
Absolutely. And I was amongst those who often opposed my own side. But thankfully now I don't have that collective responsibility.
But what went on? I mean, because it's not rocket science. You don't need to be the brain of Britain to understand that if you're locking more people up, you're imminently going to run out of prison spaces. So you should be working on that. So how can it be that over a decade it just didn't happen? And yes, I understand what you're saying. There's a couple of examples of people pushing back when it comes to planning and so on and so forth. But to not achieve any of that at all.
You know, the truth is that all of our prison estate needs close attention and a lot of money, and there's never going to be a good time for the Treasury to spend the money on prisons. Now, I was never a Justice Minister, and so I can't answer directly why it didn't happen. But
why don't you think there was ever a good time to spend money on prisons? That would surely be a good vote winner for everyone.
Well, it would be, except that people want the money spent on hospitals and on schools and on more direct policing right in front of them. And I'm afraid prisons are never going to themselves, are never going to be a vote winner when the money is spent. People want to see the money spent on getting a GP appointment.
Is that right? Does that resonate with you guys at home? Do you sit there and say, you know what, if it's about priorities, would you prioritise, I don't know, doctors, dentists and so on and so forth, or crime, law and order, prisons specifically? You tell me. What do you think to it all?
Yeah, I mean, the last government in 14 years made just 500 new prison places available. So I think Labour's absolutely right that this pledge of building 14,000 more prison places is absolutely necessary. But even Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, has admitted that this is in itself not going to be enough to tackle what we're facing, which is this growing prison population.
So hold that thought. Let's listen to the Justice Minister, then I'll come back to you, seeing as you've referenced it.
The crisis in our prisons was, I believe, the greatest disgrace of the last Conservative government. They left our prisons on the point of collapse, a situation that would have forced us to close the prison doors, cancel all trials and force the police to halt their arrests. Crime would have gone unpunished, victims would never have seen justice done, and we would have witnessed the total breakdown of law and order. The former Prime Minister knew he had to act. His Lord Chancellor begged him to do so, but instead he called an election.
So there you go, Richard, continue.
Yeah, so, I mean, this was just a mess that was dropped into the Labour government's lap, and these scenes that you've mentioned of people leaving the prisons this week is very embarrassing for the government to have to do this kind of emergency release. But quite frankly, it doesn't seem that there were any other options, and I really do rate Shabana Mahmood. I think she's one of the more impressive members of the cabinet. I think she's independent-minded, and I take her at her word when she says that this is the last thing she wanted to do, and she made a promise today that it wouldn't happen again.
Do you believe
under
that?
her watch. I believe that she sincerely wants to achieve that, and she's announced this review. She takes the view that dangerous criminals have to be in prison. And that's why they were releasing the people they were releasing, in order to ensure that dangerous criminals could be put in prison. Right? They weren't releasing the dangerous criminals. Ideally, you wouldn't be releasing any of them if you had the capacity. But when you have that choice, what do you do? I mean, they had to reduce the sentence of some of these people by 10%, and that's what they did. But I think that the other point she made today, which I think was really good, was she said, our prisons have to make better citizens, not better criminals. I think there's a real problem of what goes on in prisons themselves. The issues that we hear about drug use is really outrageous, and I think that there's something very, very wrong in the prison, not just in terms of the buildings and the estates, but actually what happens when you are incarcerated in this country.
Richard's so right about this. I spent a few days in drug and alcohol rehab with ex-offenders with the Centre for Social Justice, and I asked them, what drugs can you get in prison? And as one, they all laughed, because you can get any drugs in prison. And it's quite wrong. And I think it was really telling to see that guy with his Bentley, and he's basically laughing at the public. And such a man definitely should still be inside. I hope you'll get on a former Lord Chancellor and ask him why those prison places weren't built.
It sends, whilst I'm sort of listening to you two, I'm also watching the footage that we're playing of those loved ones collecting their now released lovers. And it sends a shudder down my spine, because that used to be me. I used to spend my time visiting my now ex in prison and waiting for him to be released with his plastic bags, and all I can say is thank goodness life's moved on. But look, there is a very obvious thing that you could do to stop overcrowding in prisons in this country, and that is the fact that we've got about 12% of the prison population foreign nationals. Why don't we deport all of those?
Well, we absolutely should deport them, and this is where the ECHR has gone too far. So the convention rights are very sensible and a bulwark against tyranny, but the problem is the right to a family life gets overinterpreted, and that is a problem. And, we've gone to and fro about it. It's become one of the main issues of the Conservative leadership contest. But, yeah, this government's got the massive majority. If they want to amend the laws so that those prisoners can be deported, then they should do so, yes.
Is there an appetite for that, do you reckon?
I don't think there's an appetite on that particular issue in this government, because I think that the Labour Party has made the Human Rights Act, which incorporates ECHR law into our domestic law, a sort of item of faith. It was something passed by the new Labour government. Keir Starmer, as a human rights lawyer, is very loyal to it, and I think that it's almost a kind of a shibboleth, a kind of ideological fixation that they have with the ECHR, and I'm not sure that they're going to move anywhere on that.
This is a really dangerous point then, because if it becomes a shibboleth on both sides, we could end up just losing a sense of all reason and proportion and what we're trying to achieve. Right. The issue here is we need to deport foreign criminals. We need to stop illegal migration. That's the policy goal. Yeah. Leaving the ECHR ought not to be a policy goal. It ought to be something we may or may not have to do in order to get what we want. And it's becoming a shibboleth on both sides, and we might end up just missing the objective, which actually the public share.
But, I mean, I am not a lawyer, but when it comes to human rights, surely there needs to be some kind of... And even as I say this, I expect people are going to clip me up and start crying when I say this, but surely there's some kind of pecking order here, because the human rights of domestic citizens, British citizens in this country, should surely take precedent over some foreign national who's in a British citizen. So what about our human rights to be able to go about our business and not have criminals wandering the streets because there's no prison space? What about our rights?
Well, absolutely. So I think sensible human rights should be universal and reciprocal. But what ends up happening is that activists, lawyers and politicians push the boundaries and turn rights into entitlements and say that people are entitled to stay in the UK and entitled to live at our expense. And that is not a universal and reciprocal right, because we shouldn't I shouldn't have a right to live at Richard's expense, and vice versa. But we do have rights to our lives and to our property and so on, and private life. So what we really need to do is rethink rights so that we've got the protections that we need that are universal and reciprocal, and where people are living at others' expense, those are not just rights, they are entitlements that are wrong, and we should change the law.
But also, you either respect human rights or you don't. So if you are a respecter of human rights to the point where you want to start crying to the European Court of Human Rights or whatever it is to your right for a family life, you evidently don't respect human rights, because you've trampled all over the human rights of your victims. And if you valued your family time and your right to a family life, you probably wouldn't be doing anything that means that you're away from your family and locked up behind bars.
Well, yes, but I guess this is a question of how judges interpret a convention. And when people go before either our domestic courts or go to Strasbourg. The considerations there are looking at all kinds of different complicated legal precedent and so on. And, there is a reason why some of that law is there and it has protected people from oppression and so on. But I think, Steve is right. There is this kind of constant sense of expansion. Many lawyers, not all lawyers, but there are some lawyers who view the law as a way of achieving policy aims. And they look to these conventions as a way of trying to achieve things that they wouldn't really be able to get through democratic means, that they wouldn't be likely to put forward in an election and people to vote on. And I think that's where it starts to become a bit insidious.
Well, there you go. You've heard different thoughts. What are yours on that? And I'm interested in that first point that we raised as well. When it comes to money and prioritisation of spend, would you prioritise, for example, new prisons over the likes of, I don't know, doctors, dentists, NHS spend? Get in touch and you tell me. After the break, look, let's talk. And don't worry if you're waiting for us to discuss Chris Cabba, that is coming later on in the programme. But after the break, I want to talk to you about wealth tax. It's being suggested now that one should be included in the budget. Who should it target and what rate should it be? You tell me.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
3 incredible young people from Essex are planning to become the youngest people ever to row, not sail, row, across the Atlantic Ocean.
It's about for 3,000 miles?
It is.
Give or take.
Almost exactly that, Sam.
The 3 flying fish, so-called, consists of Anna, Dunk, Harry, Alan and Rowan Daly, who are preparing to row that 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. It would be the second largest ocean in the world. And the trio are aiming to do that challenge in support of the Teenage Cancer Trust.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that Anna and Harry from the Flying Fish join us now. Very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
I think the two of you are bonkers, but brilliant. Absolutely incredible what you're doing to raise money for Teenage Cancer Trust. Why did you want to do this?
So our third person, Rowan, his friend actually died. So when he was in secondary school, I believe, one of his peers passed away, and Teenage Cancer Trust supported them and their family a lot. So it was definitely the right charity. Yeah, it was.
Absolutely awful. So you wanted to do something to raise money for teenage cancer. Why rowing?
So my dad did it in 2021.
The trip, the Atlantic trip?
Yeah, he rowed it as a pair. Where we live in Essex, they actually build the boats there. So we used to cycle round there past the boatyard, and he got interested and actually did it. He was the first year after COVID. And one night, we all met in the Air Cadets, so one night after Air Cadets, Rowan actually dropped me off home and the boat was outside. We were obviously waiting to get it sold. And I think he was asking some questions and we stood there at my porch and went, Rowan said, I reckon we could do that. And I was like, yeah, I reckon we could. And then we brought Harry on board, and that's kind of how it all came together.
If people are watching and they want to support you, do you have a
GoFundMe
page?
Yeah, we've got social media platforms at
Right.
the Free Flying Fish. That's Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, and our GoFundMe links in all of the bios on there.
Fantastic.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. With me, Michelle Dewberry, till 7 o'clock. Steve Baker and Dr. Richard Johnson remain alongside me. Bev says, why are you having a go just at the Tories? How many prisons have the Labour government built? Well, obviously now, in 100 days, none, Bev. But I think everyone's to blame, quite frankly, aren't they? Nobody seems to have seen this coming. And some of you, when we discuss this kind of topic, some of you will get in touch and say, well, hang on a second, because we've got other old, disused prisons now. Why can't we bring them back into play? Why can't we? Do you know the answer to that?
Probably because of the standards that are applied that we need to keep people in. But look, we're a civilised nation. We can't keep people in totally unacceptable circumstances. And I'm afraid some of our prisons at the moment, by any standard, are not where they should be. And we are trying. Really, we should be not only punishing but rehabilitating here. I don't want to sound like a soppy wet left liberal here, but you know, we do need to keep people in civilised circumstances, and that means quite a bit of expense to bring up old prisons to the standard that they would need to be.
Well, there you
so
go.
It's a tricky
Does that
problem.
answer that question? If you're one of those people that shout that at the screen, there's also a very obvious way, isn't there, to stay in civilised circumstances if that is your desire, and that is obviously not to commit crime in the first place. How about that? It's a bit of personal responsibility won't go amiss sometimes, would it? Anyway, look, a cross-party group of about 30 MPs now are urging the Chancellor to impose a wealth tax on Britons earning over £10 million. 2% is the amount of money that's being proposed. Steve, is this a good idea
It's
or
a
not?
terrible idea by any measure, and it's no wonder it's come from Jeremy Corbyn. And I see, though it's cross-party, I don't think there are any Conservatives who've signed up to it. Do you know, I looked up a quote from Hugh Gaitskell, who was Chancellor in 1950 to 51 for the Labour Party. He said, there is not enough money to take away from England's rich to raise the standard of living any further. Now, people will say that circumstances have changed. Yes, they have. Taxes have been at eye-watering, excruciating, counterproductive levels ever since. And I think it's a profoundly damaging idea. And not because it's going to affect me. I'm not up at that level. But it's crazy. People need money to invest. If we want good jobs, we've got to let people get rich and invest some money.
Well, there you go. Wealth of £10 million, 2% wealth tax. What do you think to that, Richard?
So Harold Wilson, who succeeded Hugh Gaitskell as Labour leader and became Prime Minister, pursued what was called the capital transfer tax, which was a 1% wealth tax on all wealth over £100,000, which today would be about £750,000. But eventually they had to abandon that tax because it wasn't taking in nearly as much as they had hoped, and it was becoming very bureaucratic because they had to, in effect, do valuations on people's furniture and cars.
Well, this is what I was about to ask you. When people talk about wealth tax, it's like, what do people actually mean? Do they include primary residence in there? Do they, like, what are people including within that?
Right, well, and this was part of the problem, and Dennis Healey, who was his Chancellor, tried different iterations of this to exclude certain things and so on, and eventually it didn't go anywhere. But I do think that there is a strong case for a tax on wealth, but not just as an across-the-board tax has been proposed, but I do think we need to look at inheritance tax.
What does look at inheritance tax mean?
Well, at the moment, only 5% of estates pay inheritance tax. And we're about to experience a massive change in this country as the baby boomer generation passes away in the next 20 years. This is a generation that holds a lot of property. And this is going to lead to very unequal outcomes, where if certain people, the top fifth of people in this country, will, when their parents die, earn a third of their lifetime earnings in that particular moment, and then other people will receive nothing. And I think that we really need to look seriously about how we have a fairer system of taxation that looks at something which is not by those who receive it, earned by them. At the moment, we tax income heavily.
But some of those people, some of those baby boomers, let's call them, at home, will be going, hang on a second, I had a job, I made sacrifices, I chose to prioritise buying a property, I chose to maintain, look after that property, add value to it in order for me to provide to my child, or children plural. So why, therefore, should those parents and those children be impacted if, say, I don't know, another group of parents wherever have decided not to make those sacrifices, not to invest, and so on and so forth? People will say that that's unfair.
But those parents are already providing for their children and helping their children out in their lifetimes, and that's right, and that's fine. But at the moment, 42% of tax revenue in this country comes from income and national insurance, and just 3.5% comes from capital, from wealth. And I think that isn't fair. Capital produces an income for people that it doesn't come at the cost of other things in their life in terms of, say, their leisure time. Whereas when you're working, of course, you have to make sacrifice in terms of the time you spend with your family and so on.
Yeah, but it's risk-free, isn't it? So if you invest your time, you have a job, you do a time-money exchange, there's zero risk. My rate is whatever it is, let's just say a tenner an hour. I give you 2 hours, I get 20 quid, no risk. If you then go to work, you get your 20 quid, you invest it in something, whatever that is, there's an element of risk to that. So I take my 20 quid that's already been taxed and I apply it, I take a risk. If you want to grow the economy, you want to incentivise my risk. So why should I have the same levels or similar levels to income?
Well, I think that if we look historically, we used to tax on passive income very, very high in this country. Back when Harold Wilson was Prime Minister, it was a 98% tax on top-rate tax on earned wealth, and capital gains was 30%. Now it's 10 to 18% if you're a basic rate taxpayer. I think that the Chancellor has to make tough choices. And I think this is an area where the Chancellor should look at tough choices.
Well, we've seen some of the tough choices, haven't we? Choosing to prioritise taking money off pensioners in this country. That was one of the first tough choices that they made, whilst making many other spending decisions that other people would say absolutely should not have been prioritised. You'll have strong opinions on it. You'll also have strong opinions on my next topic, ladies and gents, Chris Cabba. Goodness me, it's all coming out now, isn't it? Let's discuss it after the break.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Still plenty of blustery winds across Scotland. Could see some coastal gales by the time we reach the morning. Otherwise, largely dry, just a few showers around, but plenty of clear skies, which means we could see some fog by Wednesday morning. That's because we're saying goodbye to that frontal system down across the southeast, and we've got high pressure building with light winds. That is giving us that fog risk as we head into this evening, particularly across parts of Sussex and Kent, East Anglia, perhaps even seeing some pockets of fog across Wales, the Midlands, parts of Lincolnshire too. So do take care for that Wednesday morning commute. Feeling chilly under those clearer skies too, but a different story across Scotland. We're going to continue to see those winds strengthen overnight, so quite blustery by the time we reach the morning, with a risk of coastal gales, particularly around exposed spots in the northwest. Quite a cloudy picture to start tomorrow too, with some drips and drabs of rain and drizzle around, and quite a cloudy start across Northern Ireland too, perhaps some clearer spells in the far east. A mix of clearer skies and some fog patches to start, but once those clear away, it's actually generally going to be quite a bright day on offer. Plenty of dry weather around, just a few showers perhaps feeding into southern parts of England and later on into Wales and the Midlands. Once again though, across Scotland, those blustery winds continuing, those risk of coastal gales around northwestern exposed spots, and fair amount of cloud around too, with a risk of some light rain at times. Generally, temperatures around about average, but just above across the south and southeast, highs of around 16 to 17 Celsius. Once again for Thursday, once any fog clears in the morning, largely dry and bright across the country, but out to the west we do have some cloud continuing to spill in through the course of the day, with some outbreaks of rain by the time we reach the afternoon. This could be heavy and fairly blustery under those cloudy skies too. More rain and showers as we head towards the weekend with average temperatures. Otherwise, that's it from me. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Rann. Long delays continue up in South Yorkshire on the M1 northbound. One lane remains closed from junction 31 to 32, heading away from Sheffield up to the M18 interchange. A lorry's broken down in the inside lane. The slip road has also been closed. On the M56 in Cheshire, the inside lane's blocked off eastbound from junction 14, the Chester services through to the Runcorn turn-off. Junction 12 at the scene of an accident, causing long queues back to the M53, heading away from Chester. On the M6 in Staffordshire, the inside lane of 4 closed southbound from junction 15 to 14 towards Stafford following a collision. And on the Surrey stretch of the M25, the 2 outside lanes are blocked off clockwise following a multi-vehicle crash just after the M3. Long queues nearly back to the A3. On the M2 in Kent, the westbound exit shut at junction 2 at Strood for emergency bridge repairs. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. The former Conservative Minister Steve Baker alongside me, as is a senior lecturer at Queen Mary University of London, Dr Richard Johnson. Welcome back, everybody. John Barry says, hold on a minute, Michelle. I thought that people were turning to a life of crime because of poverty. What was going on then with all the luxury cars outside of those prisons today? I hear you, John, I hear you. I could probably make some suggestions as to what might have been going on, but I'll probably find myself in trouble. So I'll shut my mouth and move on, shall I? Look, yesterday we updated you, didn't we, with the news that the Met Police marksman that was accused of murdering Chris Cabba had been found not guilty. Well, I can tell you now, there's been developments in that story. Let's catch up, shall we, with our national reporter, Charlie Peters, and listen to him explain all.
Today, reporting restrictions on Chris Cabba's criminality were lifted, and the full extent of his links with gang crime and other violent incidents can now be revealed. We can say for the first time that in the days before he was shot dead by Sergeant Martin Blake, he was involved in a shooting at a nightclub in East London, firing a pistol into the legs of a gang feud target. Chris Cabba was a core member of the 6-7 gang in Brixton Hill, 6-7 after the telephone code for the area. And they had several feuds, long-running disputes over guns and drugs and other issues with other gangs throughout the Lambeth neighbourhood. One of their core rivalries was the 1-7 gang from Wandsworth Road, with several stabbing incidents being related between the two gangs. Now, Chris Cabba had a criminal record stretching back to when he was 13 years old. Convictions for mass stabbing attacks, the possession of firearms, the possession of blades, and also he had a domestic violence protection order taken out against him by the mother of his child. Now, all of this information was known to the judge last year when he decided to name Martin Blake, the sergeant who was charged with the murder of Chris Cabba. A senior officer of the Metropolitan Police in the court at that hearing to determine his anonymity said he'd never been more concerned about the welfare of an officer across his 30 years of experience. Well, Martin Blake was named and Chris Cabba's criminality was protected. But now Martin Blake has been exonerated and acquitted, but Chris Cabba's criminality has been revealed.
Goodness me. Where do we even begin with this? I guess I've got two concerns/questions in this, and I'm sure you and some of you at home might have your own to add as well. My first concern with all of this is that that marksman was named. So at the point of making a decision to name this man, so bearing in mind he had not been found guilty, he was going through due process. The judge made that decision to tell us, or for us to be allowed to know his name. You just heard then that despite people saying that this would have been a huge risk, potentially, to the guy's life.
Yeah.
Do you think it was right that this marksman was named?
I think it probably was not right. And coming from the Northern Ireland office, I'm well aware that, for example, in Northern Ireland, to protect jurors, there's provision for non-jury trials, which is a slightly different issue. But the point I'm making is that the justice system in the United Kingdom is well aware that trials, public as they are, can expose people to risks. And I think there is a serious case for those who rise to the grave responsibility of carrying a firearm in public service in our country. There is a case that they should have an exemption from what is normal due process, because normally somebody would be named at the point they were charged. Now, I do believe that the law should apply equally to all, but we've already heard that there's a bounty on this police officer's name. Again, I've come from the Northern Ireland office, where I was under close protection all the time I was in Northern Ireland. People may not know, but in Northern Ireland, all police officers are armed. Certain people who are at threat can have personal protection weapons in Northern Ireland. And it's always a grave responsibility for those people to carry a firearm. People who carry firearms in the UK and in public service know that it's a grave responsibility, know they'll be held to account. But having watched the footage, I am absolutely astonished that a murder charge was brought. Having watched those officers around that vehicle, the vehicle being manoeuvred, albeit slowly but aggressively...
This is what you're seeing on your screen now, by the way, in case you're wondering.
The vehicle was a powerful vehicle being manoeuvred aggressively, albeit slowly, with officers near it. I am glad that that officer took the brave decision to open fire. I mean, I've never had to do it. I was trained in the armed forces, because we all were, in the carriage of firearms in public civilian spaces. But I've never had to do it. But clearly, if he felt, and I think it was reasonable for him to believe it, that those officers' lives are in danger because a heavy vehicle was being powerfully manoeuvred, he was right to open fire and bring that situation to an end. And good on him for doing it. And I'm astonished a murder charge was brought. But that said, if I may, a counterpoint, I also remember the killing of John Charles de Menezes, which was one of the reasons I got into politics. That was a man killed by police officers on the basis of intelligence that he was a suicide bomber. And I regard that as quite different. But these matters are very, very delicate and serious. I think the main thing I would say here is we've got to ask the serious questions about how we make sure that armed officers and others who carry firearms can have the confidence to open fire when they need to defend themselves and the public, but also be held to account so that we can all have confidence that they won't open fire when they ought not.
Richard?
Well, I'll take a slightly different view on this, although a lot of the thrust of what Steve says, I think, is right. I mean, in any murder trial, typically speaking, the accused is known, and that's part of our justice system, that justice is seen to be done. And I think as a general rule, I wouldn't say that the default position is to conceal the name of an accused police officer. I think there may be a case to be made on an individual basis as to whether there would be a credible threat against someone, and perhaps in this particular instance that wasn't considered seriously enough by the judge.
But that case was put forward. The people that was pushing for him not to be named made it categorically clear, Charlie's just been explaining that as well, that there was, I mean, this guy, Chris Cabba, he was a career criminal. His criminal convictions date right back to when the guy was 13 years of age. We were told, oh, he's a really nice guy, he's a family man, construction worker, soon-to-be dad, you know, really lovely, huggable guy, that it was known who he was. It was known that he, you know, the retribution, if you like, off the back of this to this marksman would have been immense, and still he was named.
Well, on the whether or not the criminal history of Chris Cabba should have been made known earlier, I mean, I also think that the decision here was the right one, because, as I understand it, Martin Blake was not made aware, or was not aware at the moment of the shooting of any of that. No. And the trial is not whether he, you know, Chris Cabba had it coming. No. The trial is, in that moment, did Martin Blake commit a murderous act based on the knowledge that he had in the circumstance that he had? And a judge heard that evidence and decided, no, he did not commit murder.
You're absolutely right. He did not know who Chris Cabba was. What he did know was that the car that was being driven, slashed, essentially rammed at him, was a car that had been known to have been involved in not one, but two shooting incidents. The latest shooting incident was the night before the episode that sadly saw Chris Cabba lose his life. And just to be clear, everyone, I don't think that Chris Cabba should have been shot in the head and killed, but I do question the naming. And also, the other thing I question is whether or not people should have been made aware of who Chris Cabba was.
No. So these trials must be conducted in a proper manner, and it'd be quite wrong to prejudice a trial by talking about someone else's conduct. As Richard just said, you know, the question was whether the police officer had committed a murder in that moment, and the jury have, I think, rightly answered no. But I really think we have to remember what we're doing here. We're making sure that in the most of acute circumstances, it's possible for public servants to protect themselves and us all. And let's not kid ourselves what they're dealing with. They're dealing very often with people who mean to kill, and that's obviously particularly acute in relation to counter-terrorism. But we can't have officers... I mean, it's not just police officers, it's members of the armed forces. You know, people in the intelligence and security services have to deal with counter-terrorism matters. These are dealing with extremely bad people who mean to kill. And those who carry firearms in all of our defence must have a system in place where they know that there are rules, they must comply, they could be found guilty of a criminal offence, but they must have the confidence to protect themselves and others by opening fire when it's necessary.
But surely, I mean, I understand what you're saying. So the officer didn't know who Chris Cabba was at the point of shooting. I've explained the connection. He understood the car was involved in something. But knowing, I mean, if you're the jury and you understand, for example, that this man, he wanted to get away. He was not messing around. He was not playing, this fella. He wanted to get away.
Yes.
Surely that then will make you understand the potential imminent risk to life even greater, because you knew there was a reason that guy was not going to stop that car.
Let me not beat about the bush here. Through being a Member of Parliament, I've learned that sometimes people will drive vehicles extremely aggressively, recklessly, extremely dangerously, at very high speed, risking other people's lives to get away because they know the penalty for reckless and dangerous driving is lower than the penalty for being caught with what they have in the car. Now, I'm not referring to this case, I'm referring to other things I have in mind. But this is also a problem. Police officers know that. If somebody is trying to get away by driving aggressively, there's a high probability that suppose they'd let him go. If they'd let him go in that vehicle with his blood high, full of adrenaline, he would have driven very, very dangerously. He was endangering officers at the time. All of these factors will have been at play in officers' minds. And as again, I say, I'm amazed that a murder prosecution was brought. The bar should be very high to prosecuting officers.
You see, I wonder how much of the decision to prosecute was based on pressure, because very, very quickly people took to the streets. You had people like the music artist Stormzy. There were protests outside of Scotland Yard. You've got to persist, you've got to have stamina, you've got to keep going. It was immediately assumed to be a racist incident. I don't know what evidence anyone ever had that this was all motivated by different skin colours. I don't know, maybe you know more than I. Maybe let's continue this conversation in a couple of minutes, because I think there's a lot more to be said. I'll see you in 2.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, our next guests have been working closely with celebrities and MPs to help clean up our planet.
Very important. Think Ocean was founded in 2021 with 2 main goals. One, educating the next generation to make sure that they know when they're growing up that naturally we have to take care of the planet, and cleaning pollution that's already in the environment.
Well, joining us now to tell us more is Think Ocean's founder, Hugo Valdez-Vera, and the co-founder, Nolene Mariappan. Really good to see you both this morning. So, Nolene, let's start with you. What is Think Ocean, and why did you want to start this back in 2021?
Yes, so Hugo had actually been working on the environment and climate action for quite a long time. When he moved to the UK, he realised that there was a growing problem with plastic pollution and that more needed to be done because people weren't actually seeing the link between plastic, the impact on the environment and climate change. So he founded the organisation and I joined him with 3 goals, really: education, looking at technology to scale solutions, and looking at how we develop more circular economy programmes. So actually looking at reusing, recycling, actually creating local economies from what people would consider waste.
Hugo, just how bad is plastic pollution around the world, and especially here in the UK?
Well, it is bad, but we don't know the extent of how bad it is. You know, this is not much interest from the bigger players or, some government for us to know every detail of the pollution. So if we know that is from 1 to 10 is 2, probably it's about 6.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Steve Baker and Dr. Richard Johnson remain alongside me. You are kind of split, I think, when it comes to whether or not this marksman... I'm not going to give you his name. You all know his name. I don't think he should have been named, so that's why I'm deliberately not naming him. I think it's an absolute awful. That guy was... Being an armed marksman, I imagine it's a very pressured job. Your job in that moment is to take a split-second decision that you think is the right job to ensure safety. If we're going to start pursuing all of these murder charges, no one's going to want to do that job. And just to be clear, I don't think anyone can go around just randomly shooting people just because they've got a police badge. But do you think that this whole charge was brought because of pressure?
Well, it's conceivable. I mean, to pick up on that point, no one in the UK should have a licence to kill. I mean, that would be absolutely wrong. The law applies equally to everyone, including police officers. They've got the same common law defence for using their firearms that anybody else would have, were they to own a firearm. But it's conceivable that political factors bore on this case. I mean, many of us are very concerned that people in this country who are not white get stopped too often, more often than those of us who are white. That is a problem. I mean, if some of our friends who've been on this programme were here, I'm sure they would bear that out. And it is a problem that there is a perception of racism. But, you know, families will often, always, I suggest, have a different perspective on the worth and life of somebody who's actually involved systematically in crime. And I think what we need here is stronger political leadership to say, actually, to protesters, there's a justice process here. Let's let the justice system work its way through. And I think that, taken in the round here, people can see that actually we might agree, I think, here that we wouldn't have brought the prosecution. I think there's questions to be asked about the bringing of the prosecution, but actually the system worked. He used his firearm, a charge was brought, he was acquitted because in a trial by his peers, they found him not guilty, and so he is not guilty, and that is justice served. I do think that all of these issues about whether or not public servants are willing to carry firearms are extremely important, and certainly, in this case, I think illustrates that the bar was set too low, possibly in response to political concerns. That would be quite wrong.
I wouldn't want to do that job, would you? Final thoughts from you on this one, Richard?
Well, I would hope that the outcome of the trial has at least given the police some confidence that the system does work, that you know, the jury needed to determine that the use of force was proportionate, reasonable, and that the belief of risk to life was honestly held. And they did. And it's unfortunate if someone has to go through a legal process like this and to be under such intense scrutiny, particularly in this political climate. But ultimately, the marksman was found innocent, and we have to respect our process.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I do have to point out the absolute obvious. Chris Cabba would more than likely still be alive today had he actually have surrendered, paid attention to what the police were actually asking him to do and have got out of the car. And for those people that say, well, hold on a minute, his hands were visible on the wheel. Yes, fair enough, his hands might have been visible on the wheel, but when someone's driving a car very fast in your general direction, the only weapon available isn't necessarily something in your hands by way of a gun or something, isn't it? But look, obviously, I've got to say Chris Cabba's family is still very distraught. They say that they're going to continue their fight for justice and that Chris was a very decent family man, apparently, according to them. Anyway, and he is going to face, the marksman is going to face a disciplinary route. So we shall follow that story with interest. We spoke about the prisons. Gary's been in touch saying, Michelle, I am an ex-con. He says he's got the solution. He says, very simple solution. Currently, you have a nice cell with a TV, a PlayStation. This is what he's saying. You have phones, computers, kettles, nice soft beds, so on and so forth, for one person. He says he feels like it's a holiday camp in prison. It's no deterrent whatsoever. He needs to, his recommendation is to make those cells tougher, harder and harsher. Would you back that?
Not immediately, no.
But he's been in prison. He knows what he's talking about. This lad.
We don't put people in prison to torture them or to.
No, he didn't say torture. Taking your PlayStation away is not torturing you, is it?
But we want to make prison. We should have a sense for many prisoners of trying to rehabilitate them and to try and put them on the straight and narrow, not just beat them up while they're in prison.
I mean, he's not saying beat. I'm standing up for you, Gary. He's not saying beat them up. What he's saying is
I meant it in a metaphorical sense.
You get a lot of home comforts. What he's saying is actually, if it was not that comfortable for people, you might think twice about ending up there, and certainly ending up there a second time.
If you look at countries that have more humane prison spaces, like the Nordic countries, their recidivism rate is very low. So it's not like it's an people in Norway don't commit crimes because they fancy going on a holiday to prison.
Yeah, no. I mean, I don't believe that that is the universal experience of prisoners by any means. And if it was the universal experience of prisoners, maybe there was a question of reconsidering the standard in which they were accommodated. But what we should really do is, really to Richard's point, we should do the thing that works best to avoid reoffending. That's really the challenge. We need to spend enough money that we get prisoners off drugs, that we do whatever is necessary to persuade people who are planning to come out of prison and deal drugs again that is not in their interests. We've got to really focus on stopping reoffending.
Yeah. Getting the drugs out of prison is key to me, I think.
Someone's been in touch with me. I've got his name, but he wants his name withheld. He says, I'm a retired officer, and I can tell you now, during my service, I was asked to join the firearms division, and I absolutely refused. He said he knew that the police service would not support his use of the weapon if push came to shove, and he felt that his life and family and livelihood, etc., would be put at risk in the case of an incident. You say about getting drugs out of prison as though that's an easy thing to do.
I don't think it's an easy thing to do, but I think it's something that we really need to focus on, because it's just, I mean, the reporting that you hear in some prisons about how rampant drug use is, and of course that just means that people are still tied into some of the same networks that got them into prison in the first place, and it means that when they get out of prison, they've not had any opportunity to kind of break that link with what had put them in prison in the first place.
I do agree with you there, and I saw it today when we saw some of these prisoners coming out with the little carrier bags. Some of them, they had nobody waiting for them, and when we were talking to them, asking where you're going to go now, just back to where they've come from. And unfortunately, you get back into your peer group, your life continues as it did before you actually went away. But I think it's such a hard challenge to fix. And do you think anyone's got the will to try and work on that?
Certainly, I think Justice Ministers have had over the period. I've reflected, since our earlier conversation, that one Justice Minister of my acquaintance did tell me that they had a plan for about £500 million to really improve the justice system's capacity to rehabilitate people. But £500 million was never available from the Treasury. And spend to save is always a difficult argument with the Treasury. I've been involved with those arguments for a long time through the Centre for Social Justice. And a great many of, like, early intervention. You know, it's a tricky subject generally, but breaking these cycles of poverty and reoffending, it's a very hard problem. It takes a lifetime to do, and it requires spending up front. But I think the truth is, if we want to balance the books and have lower taxes later, we are going to need to spend more money on rehabilitation and making sure that children have the best start in life. I mean, these are, I think, unequivocally true.
Chris Cabba seems to have had an all right start in life when you look at that. So it didn't stop him turning to a life.
No, I'm not suggesting that people with good backgrounds weren't turned to crime, but, you know, it's a complex problem, deserves the money spent.
Ian says, Michelle, when it comes to wealth tax, this is very simple. It's pulling the ladder up on aspiration. Livy says, can I just ask a question? Is King Charles going to be charged an absolute fortune when it comes to his wealth and taxing him a little bit more? $1 million question. For now, though, that's all I've got time for. Thank you, gents. Thanks to you at home. Have a good night. Night.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Still plenty of blustery winds across Scotland. Could see some coastal gales